Jody stood in front of the nurse's station, finishing his daily report. The squawk of an ambulance and the sound of running feet interrupted him, announcing a new arrival at the Alda Bates Trauma Center in Berkeley, California. An EMT guided a gurney into the holding area, bearing a football player in full gear who cradled his left arm at an awkward angle. He had streaks of mud down his left cheek, and his dark blue jersey with the golden cow logo hung heavy with encrusted dirt and bits of grass. A man holding a helmet and duffel bag accompanied him. They ended up in Cubicle 6, Jody's section of the ER. He glanced up at the clock and realized there were 10 minutes left to his shift, so he forced himself to switch back to doctor mode after having discarded it a few minutes ago. As he moved down the hall, he raked his fingers through his hair, trying to make himself presentable. He'd been on duty for nearly 12 hours and probably looked as bad as he felt, tired and grubby as hell. He paused for a split second, listening to voices raised in anger. When he pushed the privacy curtain aside, he noticed the injured player was still in his football uniform, minus his jersey, which had apparently been cut off. His pads had not been removed, and they looked completely out of place in this setting. Coach Brenner, according to the name embroidered on his shirt pocket, stopped talking the minute Jody walked past the curtain into the room. Whatever he had been saying had upset the blonde, who had tears running down his cheeks. He wiped them away quickly, but the 2 spots of color high on his cheekbones were enough to cause Jody to question what was going on. "Is everything okay?"
"Just trying to figure out how we ended up in this place," the coach replied. "This should have never happened."
"Well, regardless of the whys and the wherefores, you're here, and I'm in charge now." Jody spoke quietly, but left little room for argument. "You need to step outside so that I can examine your player." The guy muttered a protest, but Jody stood his ground as he watched him leave. The football player heaved a sigh of relief as the coach departed reluctantly, then turned his gaze back to Jody. The flush on his cheeks remained high, but the tears were slowly dissipating. Jody walked over to the sink on the other side of the cubicle, filled a small plastic cup with water, and brought it over to his patient. "Why don't you have a sip?"
"Thanks," the guy replied.
He reached for the cup with a shaky hand and gulped the contents gratefully. The man was definitely easy on the eyes. Jody's pulse quickened, and a burst of energy surged through him. "I'm Dr. Williams," he said gently, tossing the now empty cup in the trash.
"Clark Stevens,"
the blonde countered, saying it as if he expected Jody to recognize the name immediately. Jody glanced at the patient's chart. "So you are. Nice to meet you." He touched him on his good arm and continued. "Looks like you had a bad fall."
"Yeah, it was stupid. I got distracted and lost my footing,"
Clark replied in a normal voice, seemingly recovered from the earlier upset. Jody started to move the player's arm, but stopped when he saw him wince. "Does it hurt when I do that?"
"A little bit."
"It might be broken, but I'll need an x-ray to confirm the diagnosis. I'm going to give you a shot for the pain."
"No,"
Clark was emphatic. "No shots." Jody could tell that the guy was frightened and still agitated for reasons other than the obvious. He took a gentler approach and said, "This is going to get very uncomfortable when you get to radiology. I really wish you'd reconsider."
"No, I only do painkillers in extreme circumstances."
"Broken bones aren't extreme enough?" Jody asked, raising an eyebrow. The football player shook his head, and Jody wondered where the heck this was coming from. "It's your call, Clark. The orderly is going to take you up to the 2nd floor, so you're going to have to lie down and just relax. Is there any way we can get these pads off without cutting? I know nothing about football." Clark nodded and reached up to unclip the straps, but it was awkward going with one hand. Jody noticed and moved forward to help. He manipulated the clips, brushing Clark's hand in the process, and was surprised by the sparks that flew between them. Clark made no attempt to help, seeming to enjoy Jody's fumbling with a slight grin on his face. Jody recognized the flirty move, and he paused, seeing the football player in a whole new light. "Tell me how to unfasten this?" he asked, unable to tear his eyes away from Clark's mouth. It was the kind of mouth one could only describe as kissable.
"It's the silver clip,"
Clark said, moving Jody's hand toward the center of the pads. The cubicle seemed smaller all of a sudden, as the body heat and electricity between them surged,